Okay, let's get going, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are across the country. My name is John, and I'm with Javelin. I'm one of the directors of additive manufacturing. And today it's my pleasure to welcome Michael Gaisford, who's Director of Marketing for Medical Solutions at Stratasys. And Michael, I think it's the second time you joined us. And the first one we were discussing additive manufacturing in a hospital setting, and today we're going to be discussing the advantages of 3D printing for medical device manufacturers. In a second, I'll just turn it over to Michael. And if you've got any questions, you'll see the little panel on the right side of your screen or wherever it pops up if you've customized it. There is a questions bar there. You can enter your questions in there, and at the end of the presentation today, we'll do our best to answer them. So without further ado, Michael, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. So as John said, my name is Michael Gaisford. I am the Director of Marketing for Stratasys Medical Solutions. And what I want to talk to you about today is how 3D printing can really accelerate your processes and the innovation system. It can really empower the entire innovation apparatus within your medical device company. So what we'll do is very briefly talk about Stratasys today and why 3D printing is such a growing field in medicine. And then we'll talk about how 3D printing can be used to drive your innovation and also your adoption of technology by your customers, and end with a discussion. So Stratasys is the 3D printing solutions company. We've been around for more than 25 years. We're very much a leader in this field when it comes to both the installation of systems. So we have over 140,000 industrial 3D printers installed at our customers. But we also are a leader when it comes to technology and innovation with over 800 granted and pending patents and a number of significant technology and leadership awards. So why is 3D printing of growing interest in the medical space? We really see it as a way to overcome some of the challenges that the medical field is facing today. And so when we look at the medical field, we see a number of trends that are concerning. The first is the rising cost of healthcare. The fact that 95% of countries' medical spending is growing faster than inflation. We also have an aging population, and as anyone who works in healthcare knows, older populations have significant resource demand on the medical system. And we see the group of folks who are over 65 in population globally doubling between 2010 and 2040. So we need to find ways to be more efficient. And then beyond that, we also see a big focus on outcomes and a desire by healthcare providers and payers to measure the effectiveness of their treatments and their therapies and the outcomes, and to be always driving to solutions that are improving the patient outcomes but also improving the bottom line and saving money. So when we look at 3D printing in the medical space and the adoption, we really see two trends and two drivers. The first is that medical device companies are deploying 3D printing solutions to improve the economics of their solutions. Are they able to develop products faster? Are they able to create solutions that are saving their customers money? And then significantly also outcomes. Are these new solutions improving patient quality of life and care, and are we able to deploy solutions and procedures that are customized and personalized to a patient that's going to help them improve where they end up? And so we really have identified solutions and ways you can deploy 3D printing throughout the medical device value chain in order to both improve the economics as well as outcomes at every step in the way. So starting in research and development, moving to preclinical testing and evaluation, through manufacturing, through the physician education and training, and then of course in the clinical deployment of solutions as well. What I'm going to do is in the next 15 minutes is speak briefly about each of those steps and the ways that 3D printing is enhancing and can be deployed to enhance each of those steps. So the first step in developing a new medical device, of course, is on the research and development side. And we, of course, classically have seen 3D printing being used for rapid prototyping to accelerate the time that you are able to take an idea and take it to the point where you can actually start testing and start getting verification and validation data. With 3D printing, you're able to complete more design revisions in less time, which of course means you're going to be optimizing your device design and getting a better performance device out of it at the other end, eliminating failures through that rapid iteration process. But I think really importantly, as we've advanced the material properties that our printers can be using, you're able to now create parts that are functionally able to be tested. So you can start gathering qualitative and even quantitative feedback on the performance of those devices from a printer that created the part overnight. And so it's really not just fit, form, but also getting that functional testing in as well. Beyond rapid prototyping, though, we see a really growing application in the field of prototype tooling. That's basically, instead of creating a temporary injection mold, a pre-production injection mold that's still very expensive, has a significant lead time, using our digital ABS materials, you are able to 3D print an injection mold and use the end production material on that mold to create parts that can be used on verification and validation. This is a significant savings in cost. We see savings compared to traditional tooling of 60 to 75%. It also allows you to deploy much faster in a matter of days rather than weeks for traditional mold development. But again, it's also something that's going to accelerate and improve your innovation. If you have the opportunity to create an injection mold with a slightly different feature, slightly different design to test the hypothesis about an improved part, you now have the flexibility to do that with 3D printing, where you didn't have that with traditional mold development. It was a big investment and a big barrier to creating new molds. And now, because of the low cost and speed of doing that with the 3D printing, it really has accelerated that process and allowed you to test more designs and get improved products. When we look at preclinical testing, the opportunity with 3D printing is to test devices on realistic, clinically relevant anatomical models. And you can start with patient scans from MRI and CT of patients who have the disease that your device is designed to treat, 3D print that anatomy in a multi-material model that has both soft, flexible features as well as rigid features, and then to test the device in the laboratory rather than going to an animal lab or a cadaver lab, but actually testing it on the bench and getting a really clinically relevant feedback throughout your development process. So this is really bringing the feedback cycle to a much shorter period. You're able to go from a design, a prototype, and test it on a clinically relevant model really on an iterative basis, rather than having to schedule milestone events of different animal studies or different outputs. You're able to do it on a continual basis by creating these clinically relevant models and deploying them in your lab. So here's an example of how that would work. This is a scan, the image on the left of the neurovascular system of a patient. And what they've done in this lab is they've deployed a synthetic clot within the model so that the right branch of the vasculature is blocked. And they place the model onto a fluoro system, and they're getting confirmation angiography that the clot is there and blocking the path. And then they deployed their prototype device. In this case, it's a stent retriever through the model, again, deploying it under fluoroscopy in order to remove that clot, the same way the device would be used clinically. And at the end of the procedure, you can see they performed confirmation angiography, and the right vessel has been breached and is now patent. So the device worked in some ways in the way that it was intended. However, they were able to see that part of the clot moved distally, and so although the device performed well, it was not optimal. And so rather than take that device into expensive preclinical animal testing, cadaver testing, more expensive and much more logistically challenging testing, they're able to take that feedback from a bench model and reiterate, do another iteration on the device to optimize it before going into that more expensive testing. So they've really avoided a test process that would be prohibitive. And we can see this being adopted pretty widely in the medical field. So here's an example from Abbott Vascular. They've even put this up on their public website, talking about their use of 3D printing and anatomical models to simulate those clinical environments and test them effectively. So you can see they really value the ability to take patient scans and start from a clinically relevant anatomy and test and get feedback on those models before they take it too far in the product development process. The next step in medical device development, of course, is moving into manufacturing. And the opportunity with 3D printing is to produce low volume, high value parts. Before you invest in production environment manufacturing, you can move from your prototype workflow of development with 3D printing and continue to use that to gather continued feedback and for clinical evaluation. And we've seen customers who have used 3D printed products and devices in clinical trials. They've used it in early commercialization, and they're able to take it from the limited feedback they get from their early testing and development when they get feedback from a handful of physicians. And then once they've gotten feedback from dozens, if not hundreds of physicians, they're able to do their final design freeze and move into production at a much higher volume. And shift away from the additive manufacturing. But it provides that flexibility to delay your investment in production tooling by continuing to manufacture at the lower volumes until you fix your design and fix your feedback. In addition to manufacturing parts, 3D printing is also incredibly useful when it comes to creating manufacturing tools, jigs, fixtures. Having this capability on site allows you to create the tools that you need for your situation. And so you have it on site, you're able to manufacture much more quickly and cost effectively than an outsourced provider. And with new materials that are biocompatible and sterilizable, we're able to create tools, jigs, and fixtures that can be used in a range of challenging manufacturing environments. When it comes to marketing and education, this is one of the areas that the medical device industry has long struggled with. How do you train physicians to use your devices in a way that is going to prepare them for the clinical challenges they will face when the device is used in the lab? And historically, they've used animal models and a number of other models, but animals, they have limitations. They obviously don't have human pathology. They might not have any pathology at all. They're an approximation of human anatomy. And then, of course, there's the expense and ethical considerations. The use of cadavers has been employed, but when you look at cadavers, often they're highly processed, and therefore they no longer retain the live tissue feel They also often don't have the targeted pathology, or if you are looking for targeted pathology, you get a limited number of cadavers that you can work for, and certainly a much higher cost if you're having to scan all of the models, the cadavers, until you find one with the anatomy of interest. And of course, the use of mannequin models is possible as well, but they're merely an approximation of the human anatomy, and because of the limited customization capability, you get only an ability to operate on a very limited range of clinical scenarios. So this is where 3D printing really comes in to empower your education and training department to be able to create customized, enhanced, realistic models that are based, again, on real human anatomy scans. You're able to not just train physicians on a single model, but by taking multiple scans and creating multiple models, you can expose them to a range of clinical scenarios and pathologies. And then the capability of 3D printers today, when it comes to realistic tissue properties, the fact that you can customize these models in ways to incorporate things like active blood flow or sensors or any other elements that you want to incorporate, it really has unlimited design freedom to incorporate those features. And of course, they have advantages in terms of being easy to maintain and train in any environment. You can store your digital models and only print them when they're needed, share them with colleagues around the world, and print locally to really take the power of the digital workflow. So here's an example from one of our customers, the Center for Biomedical Technology and Integration. This model was created as a neurosurgery training phantom. It's actually designed to take a biopsy of a tumor. And you can see here the model. The operator is able to cut into the model using a scalpel, using forceps. They're going through each of the steps of the procedure as the physicians would do in the lab. And so they're getting the experience and the skill set with the actual devices. Here they're trephining the bone, and the feedback that we've received is that the feedback, the physical feedback, the tactile feedback is very similar when operating on these 3D printed models. And of course you can vary the tissue properties, so you can have harder or softer skin or bone. And now they've entered the devices, the endoscope, to navigate through the ventricles of the brain. And you can see here that the model has been colored. And this was actually with an earlier version of our 3D printer before we had the full color capability. Now we can incorporate any range of colors. But with the coloring, you're of course able to identify different arteries, vessels, that the trainee should take note of and should be used to guide their procedure. One of the other elements of 3D models that for training is that you can incorporate challenges into them, so that physicians, and when you see here when they take the biopsy, there's going to be a blood hemorrhage. And so physicians are exposed to these clinical challenges in a training environment rather than being exposed the first time they see it in a live patient. And so they have to deploy, again, all the steps that they would clinically in order to irrigate the hemorrhage and to treat it effectively. And so with the power of the 3D model is to train in a no-risk environment, but in a very clinically relevant and realistic simulation. As I mentioned, the capabilities of 3D printers today, especially with the Stratasys J750, you're able to replicate virtually any anatomy. Using full color capability, you can differentiate the critical structures. You can achieve photorealism if that is a goal. You can replicate fine anatomy. The printers are able to print at a resolution of down to 14 microns. And so again, very small, very delicate structures can be recreated. And you can use transparent materials to help you visualize internal structures. to give your trainees, if it's desirable, that visual access and orientation to be able to actually see through the model that they're operating in. The advantages we see in terms of the cost basis are that you're going to be saving significantly on the overhead. So you don't need to rent a specialized licensing facility. You don't need to hire a veterinarian or a technician or an anesthesiologist. You're not paying some of these fees that are very high in order to run a lab. And so when you remove a lot of that overhead, the cost savings can be significant when you use 3D printing for your training and education programs. Finally, for the actual clinical deployment of devices and procedures, 3D printing really allows is mass customization. So you can create procedure kits that are personalized to the patient's anatomy based on an MRI or a CT scan to generate them. You can create custom molds, cutting guides for more accurate cuts. You can combine your medical device with a 3D printed model of the patient's anatomy that allows the surgeon to practice on the anatomy before going into the operating room. And the opportunity here really is to reduce the operating time, create more efficiency when your devices are deployed, and of course, in the long run, to improve patient outcomes as well. And so the secondary application is also to create replicas of patient-specific anatomy to allow the physicians to plan the optimal approach, to actually practice the procedure on the models, or to determine the optimal device selection. So if you've got a range of devices to be implanted, and looking at the 3D computer rendering doesn't give you confidence in which device to deploy, you can actually print the anatomy or just the portion of the anatomy of interest and deploy devices in there to confirm which size is going to be the most beneficial to the patient. So at this point, I will pause and hand the call back to John in case there are any questions, but thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Michael. If you've got any questions out there, folks, please feel free to type them in. I don't see any just yet, but if you've been just listening and want to type a couple in, go for it, and we'll do our best to answer them. Oh, we've got something inbound right here. Okay. Let's see. Talking about the resolutions, what type of surface finishes can you get?
So I'm not sure what you mean by what types of surface finishes. We can have as a surface finish, we can have a rigid material which can be then sanded and polished and made even finer in terms of the surface finish as well. It's not uncommon, especially if you're creating a model that is transparent, that you would do some sanding of the surface and then apply a clear coat on top of it in order to get an improved translucency and improved clarity into the model. We can also have surface finishes that are rough. If you're looking for a rough surface finish, that needs to be designed into the model and certainly into the surface of the 3D model. And then we also, when you saw that neurosurgery training, Phantom, you can have surface finish of a flexible material as well. So you can deploy that on the surface of the model as well.
Okay, that sounds great. I don't see any other questions at this time. So Michael, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure to have you join us, and hopefully we can do it again soon sometime. Thanks, everybody.